Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Back in the days of university, I had set my coordinates or GPS for the corporate ladder. But somehow, at 250 kilometers per hour, that route changed and I ended up somewhere here. A lot of people say life plans out when you're making plans. For me, life started when I was making spreadsheets. And, it was always a very exciting and interesting starting point. And I remember these fond memories. But when I was a young boy, I remember back in 1996. And that was when we first got satellite TVs. And you would see these huge satellite dishes and whatever you call them up on rooftops of houses. To me, that was an opportunity in 1996 to watch my first ever race. But as an introduction, I started thinking about motorsports when I was 7 years old. But it was just a thought and a hobby. So just to give you a quick recap, as Murtada and his team said, I have to be really quick with the time, and I said I can do it in 2 minutes, but that was not fair. So I went to the University of Nottingham. I did 4 years of finance and accounting, and I was all set for the corporate desk job. The usual, 8 hours, 5 days a week. But something, along that line changed. And as of today, as Murtada said, I currently race for the number 46 BMW in the World Endurance Championship, one of the largest and most competitive championships in the world. For those of you who don't know me, my career started in 2006 as the first circuit racer from Oman, a sport that did not exist in this country. We were always used to the world of rallying and so on and so forth. But from a circuit racing point of view, that was the first ever competition we went to. I went to the UK. I did 3 years in Formula Renault. And after that, 3 years in Porsche Carrera Cup. And then my life started changing slightly by going into something longer and longer hours of racing. So that's a quick recap of myself, and inshallah in the panel we will have a lot more to talk about. But for now, it was 1996, satellite TVs on, Ayrton Senna, Michael Schumacher, the greatest of greats racing around, me watching them on TV and thinking, oh, how can I mimic this, or how can I do this? And I was lucky enough to be 5 minutes away from one of the most important tracks for me in Oman was the go-kart track, which was just 5 minutes away from here. And that's where I learned my trade. But going through that, what we saw on TV and what we tried to mimic was me starting to dream about something that was bigger and beyond what I ever thought would be possible. I think, when I was studying in university, doing my finance and accounting, I try and look at what was the turning point. What was that, changing point in my career? And because alhamdulillah, I've been in this for so long, there's so many small steps that I had to go through. But I still look at one of the first ones as a friend of mine calling me up in the UK. He's in Oman. He's like, Ahmed, I'd love you to come and race with us in a 24-hour go-kart race. And I told him, do you realize you're calling me on an international number, asking me to come to Oman while I'm studying? He's like, Ahmed, you always find a way. I did try and find a way. I was a student. I didn't have so much cash sitting around to go and buy an airplane ticket. So I was lucky enough to have a lot of BA miles at that time. And I used my miles. I didn't tell anybody in Oman that I was coming. Those days, the weekends were Thursday and Friday in Oman, Saturday and Sunday in the UK. I made a 4-day holiday. And we did really well in this go-kart race. And that, to me, was one of the huge changing points in my career in terms of, what if I didn't pick up that phone call? What if he never called me? Would I be in this line? Would I find another path to where I am? Would I, be happy with where I was in the world of, I used to be a finance and accounting major, and I was working for Ernst & Young. And at that time, before all of this, you know, the fastest I would be driving is between my desk job to a client I'm late to, you know, breaking rules of driving and ethics. But, you know, this week is the, you know, traffic week, so we will not talk much about those days. But having said that, there were huge barriers to entry. There were huge stones and stepping stones that I had to overcome. You know, a lot of people didn't understand what I was trying to do. Is this a hobby? Is he trying to have fun? Those days, you know, individual sports was only through Ali al-Habsi, who's sitting right here, alhamdulillah, Fatma Nabhani. A few individual sports at that time were trying to break out of team sports, and that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to move a hobby or a fundamental fun philosophy to something as an SME, as something that we could do for Oman from a sporting field, which would share the vision that I had, which was to try and punch above our weights. You know, today the barriers to entry keep changing. When we first started, what is circuit racing? We've passed that educational side of things. And for me, it was about trying to make sure that when we do achieve this and when we go in the correct path. So in terms of these barriers, you know, it has changed in how it was. And I would add COVID to this kind of barrier of entry. When COVID happened, you know, sports, football, soccer, and motorsports were one of the first sports to come out of that kind of situation. But due to time, we won't go too much into that side of things. But the ability to drive under pressure. Just a quick example, you know. We had one of the most difficult challenges to face during a race weekend is when weather changes and when things come against you, and all of a sudden you're in the car, you're driving, you're racing, and you've got someone on your ear telling you that, listen, we're expecting this rain to go away, you need to keep pushing. How do you learn from that experience, you know? In an HR kind of world, I can relate that a lot to what goes on. You know, all of a sudden, you are sitting down and you have budget constraints. You have you have limited access to the right personnel. These changes require really fast decisions, but sometimes it has to be correct decisions, because what you do now can impact you in the future. And in racing, we have to take these decisions in split seconds. As you can see that timer dropping, I've never seen a clock move that fast, to be honest. But, you know, we have to make these decisions in split seconds. And they are the philosophy of teamwork. You know, you watch a race, you will see a driver, you'll see him standing on the podium, but there's a lot of things that happen behind it. And in our world, the biggest failure is 3 letters, DNF, did not finish. This is the biggest failure for us. Have we gone through that failure? Yes, we have. Did we learn from this failure? That is the most important thing to know about. What do you do? What do you take from that? You know, do you analyze that data? Do you look at it and you say, how do we improve? Or do you say that can't be done? You know, we had a DNF. One example is in 2014. But what we learned from that DNF is our success in 2022 and 23, for example. We, alhamdulillah, as a Omani team, stood on the top of a podium at one of the most iconic races of Le Mans, the 24 hours, finishing second. Alhamdulillah, thank you. I remember the messages I was getting in my ear, and I can't see, and it's raining in the middle of the night, and there was just one thing: Ahmed, just keep it on the black stuff, you're doing a great job. Sometimes all you need as a driver, as an employee, is how do you motivate that personnel in that organization to get the best out of him? You know, I don't always race with my best friends. We are in really hostile environments sometimes. But in the end of the day, it's about the team. And you know, in an HR platform, it's about the organization. You know, the small team, the big team concept. Let's use a quick example of a Formula One race. You know, a pit stop in a Formula One race now these days is below 2 seconds. That's it. the car is there and the car is gone. But you've got 30 to 40 people working on something like that. In our case, we have 4 people to 5, and we do a pit stop within 20 seconds. And that's unbelievable. So over here, you've got an HR department, because it's a huge multinational entity. And over here, you've got a tiny company that's performing at the best of its capabilities with a certain 1 or 2 individuals, trying to maximize the most they can from productivity from the individuals they have. So it's about that communication that goes on between organizations, teams, and so on. I've run out of time. I hope I don't get a financial penalty for that. My quick, I don't know how you dropped it from 15 minutes to 10. So balancing speed with sustainability, we touched about that, I talked about me being a racer who used to maybe race in 20 minutes. Today we race 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. What's sustainable in racing? Do I try and maximize the top and fastest lap every single lap? Or is my goal to try and get the best time I can in the end of 24 hours? So, we face, we were listening about crisis management as well, barriers to entry early on. But over here, it's about how do we make our team sustainable for the long term? How do we prepare ourselves for the long term? And how do we extract the potential of our employees? Do we put them under pressure, so much pressure that the exhaustion levels are extremely high? My heart rate can go up to 188 in the race car. It can, and it has. But where do we want us to perform, We want us to always perform for the longevity of our abilities as well. Alhamdulillah, we have stood on one of and most of the nicest podiums in the world. But today it's not about me winning or getting more trophies. It's about being able to put our country in a position that it's never been before. It's about opening the door for other potential racing drivers, sports people, anyone who can get motivated from our presence in this kind of world of motorsports as well, It is about trying to always give back to the community. Alhamdulillah, today I'm surrounded with greatness in just one table. We're talking 3 different languages in one platform. We're talking about, mashallah, Nadira, who has so much self-belief in climbing a mountain. That requires so much mental thing, which inshallah we'll talk in the panel more. But to end, whether it's a racing team, whether it's an organization such as yourselves, we all have to learn from our mistakes. We all have to use those mistakes as fueling us to do the right thing for the longer period of time. We have to put ourselves and understand how do we work under pressure. And maybe right now, how do I work in a 10-minute session? But inshallah, thank you for allowing me to, give you a quick recap of from a spreadsheet to an actual racing track. And hopefully we can answer more questions during the panel. Thank you very much once again.